If you flew over South Africa in the mid-20th century, you would see two distinct worlds existing side by side. On one side, manicured green estates funded by a booming economy that extracted vast reserves of the world's gold. On the other, separated by a single road or a stretch of dirt, lay miles of dense, rusted iron shacks. This proximity was highly intentional. These massive white mine tailings heaps looming directly behind residential areas are a byproduct of mining operations that were deliberately situated right next to strictly controlled pools of cheap labor. In 1948, the ruling National Party took this existing racial segregation and codified it into a highly efficient legal framework. They named this system Apartheid, the Afrikaans word for separateness. Apartheid operated as an engineered economic machine. The government designed it to guarantee a permanent, subjugated class of laborers to protect the wealth of a white minority. The core of this machine was the mining industry. The government mandated artificially low wages, ensuring that black miners earned about $25 a month, 15 times less than their white counterparts. By law, these workers were barred from holding any managerial or specialist positions. Down in the narrow, underground rock tunnels, the average black miner was locked into a life of unskilled, back-breaking labor. They lived regimented lives in workers' compounds, separated from their wives and children for months at a time. To trap this labor force in place, the state deployed the Pass Laws Act of 1952. This legislation effectively turned black South Africans into heavily policed foreigners within their own home country. Every black citizen over the age of 16 was forced to carry an internal passport like this one. It contained an official identity photo and an index tracking their labor history. This document dictated where they could work and travel, subjecting them to instant criminal prosecution if they failed to produce it on demand. To defend this brutality, the state and the powerful Dutch Reformed Church offered an ideological shield. They claimed this racial hierarchy was God's will, officially classifying the black population as existing at a lower state of development. By the 1950s, the state had built a fortress. It was legally airtight, incredibly profitable, and morally sanctioned by the religious elite. For the oppressed, all legitimate, peaceful avenues for change had been systematically sealed off. For decades, the leading resistance organizations, the African National Congress and the Pan-Africanist Congress, relied on peaceful civil disobedience. They organized mass gatherings and defiance campaigns, attempting to negotiate with the government through nonviolence. That strategy collapsed on March 21, 1960. Thousands of protesters gathered near the Sharpeville police station to peacefully burn their internal passbooks and demand an end to the system. In response, the police opened fire on the unarmed crowd. 69 people were killed, and nearly 200 were wounded. Most of the victims were shot in the back as they tried to flee. To leaders like Nelson Mandela, the aftermath of Sharpeville suggested that the era of nonviolence was over. If the state was willing to use lethal force against unarmed citizens, the resistance had to change its methods or face total elimination. The movement rapidly radicalized. The government officially banned the ANC. Mandela co-founded a militant wing known as MK and launched a campaign of guerrilla sabotage. The state retaliated by charging Mandela with conspiracy to violently overthrow the government, eventually sentencing him to life in prison. By criminalizing protests and murdering unarmed citizens, the South African state left its opposition with only one option. The apartheid machine inadvertently forced a transition into an armed struggle that would eventually break it. With the old guard in prison, a new generation stepped up. In June 1976, over 10,000 students took to the streets in the Soweto uprising, protesting a law that forced schools to teach subjects in Afrikaans, the language of the ruling elite. The police response was lethal. Officers turned their weapons on the crowd, killing over 150 students. Some victims were only 13 years old. This atrocity made it impossible for the regime to maintain its civilized image on the world stage. International shock translated into economic action. Foreign governments enacted strict trade embargoes, and multinational corporations began pulling their investments out of South Africa entirely. Internal uprisings were making the townships ungovernable, while international boycotts began to starve the treasury. This dual pressure attacked the core requirement of the apartheid machine. it had to remain profitable to survive. By the late 1980s, the financial cost of suppressing a nationwide rebellion had bankrupted the state. Surrounded by a crippled, sanctioned economy, President F.W. de Klerk concluded that the system was no longer sustainable. In February 1990, de Klerk made massive concessions. He legally unbanned the ANC and ordered the release of Nelson Mandela after 27 years behind bars. The struggle culminated in 1994. In South Africa's inaugural all-inclusive elections, the black majority finally gained the right to vote. Mandela became the country's first black president. Rather than weaponizing his newfound power for revenge, he pursued a strategy of reconciliation, calling on citizens of all races to unite and build a rainbow nation. The state's political collapse was the direct result of a resistance that had learned to target the machinery's economic lifelines. When the profit motive was removed, even the most heavily militarized system of oppression ground to a halt. This diagram illustrates the sobering reality of modern South Africa. An estimated 93% of the country's wealth is held by just 10% of the population. The fall of political apartheid did not erase the economic apartheid it built. Because wealth was never redistributed, this entrenched divide continues to fracture the country, fueling extreme crime. Millions of citizens still wake up in the exact geographical zones of poverty that were meticulously mapped out by the laws of the 1950s. Discriminatory laws can be wiped from the books with the stroke of a pen, but dismantling a machine built to engineer wealth inequality takes generations, leaving scars across the landscape that refuse to easily heal.